Hi! So KIT Plugins have just released a Neve 2254 compressor plugin in their range of plugins, which is based on the hardware in the Blackbird studios in Nashville. And instead of making a review video just about that plugin, I figured it was time to compare some of the well-known plugins that emulate that compressor. And there's also a wildcard in there. So let's go! Now, whenever a new plugin like this is released, it's always nice and well to have a specific look at that plugin, of course. But the real value comes from comparing it to other plugins, which you may already have or which may be a better deal actually. So that's what I actually want to do in this video. We will of course have a look at the KIT Plugins BB N54, but you could also see that as a general tutorial for the Neve 2254 compressor, because all of them pretty much have the same kind of controls and the same way of operating it. Now, KIT Plugins did give me a version of this plugin so that I could check it out for you in this video. They even gave it to me before it was released, but this is not a sponsored video and they will not get to see this video before I actually publish it. Now, you will be able to download all of the audio comparisons that I'm going to do later in this video, so you can really check it out in very much detail in your own DAW if you want to. Now, I've never actually had the good fortune to operate a real 2254 Neve compressor, but I do have a Rupert Neve Designs R&D Portico 5043 compressor in that rack back there. And even though this is definitely not the same type of compressor, I will also compare it to the plugins that are emulating the Neve 2254, because, well, let's just see what the difference is, especially in sound, of course. Hardware versus plugins. But in general, the Neve 2254 limiter and compressor is a device that is supposed to sound very creamy and classy. And let's have a look at that via the new KIT Plugins release first. Because this is the KIT Plugins website, which shows the compressor, well, one of the versions of the compressor actually, but more about that later. And they have a subscription available for this compressor, but you can also get a perpetual license, of course. And normally this compressor will cost $150, and at the moment there's an intro sale for $75. And this plugin is inspired by the iconic Neve 2254 compressor limiter. The BB N54 delivers rich analog warmth and musical dynamic control straight to your DAW. Designed in partnership with Blackbird Studio and tuned to John McBride's personal taste, it captures the unmistakable low-end weight and harmonic depth that made the 2254 a studio essential. And of course, there is a 14-day free trial, so by all means, go check it out yourself before buying, so you know that it's something that is useful to you. And in case you do decide to buy it, you can get an additional 10% discount by using the voucher code Lanewood10 on checkout. Now let's have a look at the plugin and its controls. So this is the KIT BB N54, and this is the single version. Later a little bit more about the dual version, but it basically has an input section on the left side, an output section on the right side, the whole preset management and extra options in the top bar over here. And you can also enable the sidechain input over here if you want to use another channel to drive the compression on this channel that you have the plugin on. Now there's a general on-off switch. And the signal flow through this plugin may not be immediately obvious, but it's basically going from the input here to the compressor part, which is on the right here. You have slow and fast attack time for the compressor. You have ratios from 1.5 to 1 to 6 to 1. You can enable the vintage mode for the ratio, which means that those ratios are not exactly, but they are more modeled according to the actual hardware. If you want to use exact compression ratios, you need to turn the V off. There's the threshold, which determines when compression will happen. Compress recovery is basically the release time with also an auto mode. And the release time on these compressors is pretty long for modern users. So they also have this option on the plugin to choose 1/8 of the actual time that you set. So right now the release time would be 50 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, etc. Now after the compressor, the signal goes into a limiter, which also again has a slow and fast attack time, where fast is 0.1 milliseconds and slow is 5 milliseconds. And you can also turn it off, of course. Now the level that goes into the limiter from the compressor is determined by this limit in gain control over here. For example, if you're doing heavy compression, you may already want to increase the level a bit going into the limiter as a sort of makeup gain inside the plugin already. Then the limit level is actually the threshold for the limiter, which determines the amount of limiting. And the limit recovery is the release of the limiter with also an auto option. Furthermore, you have a sidechain filter, which you can use to make sure that the low frequencies do not trigger the compression so much. And there's a mix knob for slowly mixing in the compression, listening only to the compressed signal if you set it to 100%. So you can do parallel compression in the plugin itself. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning, there are actually two versions of this plugin. This one is the dual version, which is basically the same, but it has some added features. One is that you see all the controls duplicated, and right now it's in linked mode, meaning that the left and right side of the plugin are used for the left and right side of a stereo signal. You can see your left and right are mimicking each other. You can also set the left and right side to unlinked though, meaning that you can do different settings on the left side and the right side. And in that case, you get a trim control so that you can also vary the level of the left and right side. And you have the mid-side mode, in which the left side works on the mid signal and the right side works on the side signal. And when you're using it in mid-side mode, you can also listen to only the mid signal or only the side signal. And again, you can use the trim control to bring the sides or the mids up and down separately. But let's just use the single version of this plugin for the further demos, because it's just more simple to operate, fewer buttons on screen, and the options are basically the same when demoing in linked stereo and mono. Let's have a listen to this compressor on the drum track. So these are the drums with the compressor disabled. So let's start applying some compression. Quite a lot of compression now, and we can really squash it by setting it to fast and making the release very quick as well. Which is too much on its own, of course, but you can mix it in to bring some excitement to the uncompressed drum track. Yeah, you can really hear the room sound come up, of course. We can squash it even more with the limiter. And by the way, this gauge, of course, indicates how much compression you're doing, but also how much limiting you're doing. So let's get some limiting action as well. Totally annihilated. Again, better to use this in parallel. Now, before I compare this to the other 2254 plugins, if you like this video or find it useful at all, please give it a big thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe to the channel and ring the little bell icon if you want to get notified when I publish another video. For even more support to the channel, you can use the super thanks button below the video, which is a virtual tip jar. Or if you intend on buying anything in one of these stores, you can use the affiliate links in the description to give me a small commission on whatever you buy in those stores without any additional cost to you, which is always greatly appreciated. Let's now compare this 2254 Neve emulation to some other 2054 emulations and the Neve compressor in my rack over here. And let's first compare it on these drums. Now, the compressors that I'm using are, of course, the KIT BB N54. And I'm mostly focusing on the compression section of this plugin and not so much on the limiting section. And for this drum example, I've set it a bit less exciting as I just demoed. Slow attack to let the transients of the drums come through, 4:1 compression ratio, and 100 milliseconds release due to this 1/8 button over here, and fully wet. The other 2254 compressors that I'm using are the UAD Neve 2254E. As you can see, also slow attack, 4:1. Set the threshold for the same amount of gain reduction. And this one also has that push-pull button to get 1/8 of the actual release time, which is listed here. Limiting is off. And another 2254 emulation that I'm using here is the Lindell 254E limiter and compressor from Plugin Alliance. As you can see, same settings. This one doesn't have the 1/8 push-pull button, but it does go down to 100 milliseconds release time natively. So that's also the same. Slow attack on the compressor, limiter off. And finally, this is an export from my Portico 5043 compressor, because I cannot put it on multiple channels at the same time. So I basically set it to very similar parameters as the 2254 plugins, and to get the same amount of gain reduction. And in this case also the attack and release time are actually similar, because they are also available on this hardware unit. Now the 5043 compressor is not a diode bridge compressor like the 2254 of course. It's a more regular VCA compressor, but still it's a Rupert Neve design. So let's just check out the differences. I'll start with no compression and then go over the various tracks one by one. So what do you think? Sort of similar, but definitely not all exactly the same, right? But I guess that also depends on how detailed you're listening. Let's check out these same compressors on acoustic guitar. And in this case, the settings on all of them are fast attack to really rein in those acoustic guitar transients, 4:1 compression ratio, again 100 milliseconds release. And on my Portico, it doesn't actually have the fast attack of the 2254 because that's around 5 milliseconds. And the lowest attack time on the Portico is 20 milliseconds, but let's just compare it anyway. First without compression. So you can see that the peaks on the Portico track are less pronounced as on the other track. And that's of course because this is the signal after compression, because I rendered it with the Portico in the insert chain. And speaking of that, even though the attack on the Portico is not as fast, I think it reined in those transients pretty nicely as well. Let's have a listen on the vocal. And these are the settings on the vocal. Again, fast attack, 4:1 compression ratio, 100 milliseconds release time. And this time I compressed it quite a bit more, which you will see in the gain reduction meter when I'm playing. But let's first start without any compression. The vocal sounds like this.
The way you talk to me is killing me softly, but I don't mind, 'cause it makes me feel alive. The way you talk to me is killing me softly, but I don't mind, 'cause it makes me feel alive. The way you talk to me is killing me softly, but I don't mind, 'cause it makes me feel alive. The way you talk to me is killing me softly, but I don't mind, 'cause it makes me feel alive. The way you talk to me is killing me softly, but I don't mind, 'cause it makes me feel alive.
Again, since this was fast attack on the other compressors again, I do not have such a fast attack on the Portico, but it compared pretty well anyway. So what do you think? Do you hear any differences at all? Do you prefer one over the other? Let us know in the comments. Now finally, I also tried this as a mix bus compressor on a track from my band The Wash, a live track that we did years back, on which I actually used the 5043 as a mix bus compressor. So the settings on the 2254 compressors are more based on what I had set on the 5043. And the mix bus compressor was actually only lightly tickling this mix with a compression ratio of 2:1, slow attack to let the transients peek through, and a release of 100 milliseconds, which is actually the fastest that the Portico 5043 can do. Now I'm not doing this live, I exported the mix from a different project, just exchanging the mix bus compressors. So let's see if we can hear a difference.
I can live two lives if I would. No, it satisfies more. Do one thing good. You're the better of me. I can live two lives if I would. No, it satisfies more. Do one thing good. You're the better of me. I can live two lives if I would. No, it satisfies more. Do one thing good. You're the better of me. I can live two lives if I would. No, it satisfies more. Do one thing good. You're the better of me.
Now over here I think the Portico, which was used as the initial mix bus compressor, sounds slightly more open. All of the 2254 sound more grabby to me. Trying to control the high end a bit more for some of them at least. Let me know how you hear this in the comments and whether you have a preference. Now again, let me remind you that you can download all of these audio examples to your own DAW so that you can listen in much more detail, go wild with analysis plugins, whatever you want. Now summarizing, I think all of these 2254 plugins provide a lot of nice, classy, creamy analog flavor. They're quite flexible as well, given that they have both a compressor and a limiter on board. I think the KIT Plugins version and the UAD version are very similar in functionality, where the Lindell provides a bit less. For example, it does not have that 1/8 button to get the faster release time. And there's also no dual version of this plugin, providing unlinked and mid-side control. Now, if you like these kind of deeper dives into plugins and comparing them to hardware, I have a whole series of videos where I compare plugins to hardware, which I will link for you over here. Check it out, enjoy, and see you soon.